So Rebecca Watson a while back made a study. Political opponents are more stupid than evil, and I'm like, yeah, shut up. You know, I like I want to personalize this stuff, okay? Because making this, a personal story and everything is much more likely to, the subjectivity of everything and acknowledging this would make people less likely to, have the extreme reactions that they do. So Rebecca Watson, if you remember who she ultimately was, then you remember Elevator Gate and everything and way back in that drama has been it's so old now to even have anything to say about it is like commenting on drama that is like necro posting at this point, but I didn't weigh in on it at the time. And as far as social commentary on what happened at Elevator Gate that I had suppressed for so long, um, up until Elevator Gate, I had an extraordinary amount of respect for Richard Dawkins and militant atheism that just got shredded at that point. I started to realize that Richard Dawkins has had a lot of cringe political takes, and I started waking up to it, and the fact that if atheism had like a maligned reputation with women, that a lot of the figures in the atheist movement had more than earned it for all of us, and I had a lot of anger and upset at them for it. So it was like I almost reflexively have gotten to the point where like I will make a big deal out of following Rebecca Watson and bragging about it, and being like, I nominate this woman to be, you know, president, of the atheist movement or something like that of that line. Like I think that she should be a leader in it, of it. But unfortunately, the internet did the fucking Dear Muslima letters and everything, and I just the fallacy of relative privation, and Captain Andy put forward his video on it, and I just felt that that was so sufficient in of itself that I didn't need to necessarily say anything. When Captain Andy put his video forward about the fallacy of relative privation, it was like, these guys are using logical fallacies, and it's like you can montage it. Like every time you hear some YouTuber come on and dismiss something as a first world fallacy, that is the fallacy of relative privation. If your mother told you, that it doesn't matter that the food is disgusting to you, that there are starving children in Africa, that was the fallacy of relative privation. uh this tendency to see problems as relative to other problems is just not the way that we go about solving problems anyways in the first place, because the one that is more close to home is often easier to address in the first place. So the one that is more immediate and before us is one that we are necessarily not likely more likely to be able to easily solve than one that's far away and on the other side of the world. The practicality of really doing anything to intervene and benefit those women over there in Iran and everything that all the women's issues were being compared to at the time is a lot less likely than being able to help a woman that's right here at home, right in front of you, to be useful to her, to benefit her in some way, or to at least listen to her story and, empathize with her. I mean, holy shit, these guys just didn't want to do that particular work. They were trying to dodge it, and I found it very disgusting. And there's a term for what they did. I want you to know that every time you come on here and you see somebody like TLDR say, first world problems, he's using a logical fallacy, and that, it may be some comfort to you that logic is on your side, but it hasn't been to me because it won't stop people from being, complete chuds. People want to say first world problems. They're not necessarily going to care that logic is on the side of those of us calling them out for the fallacy of relative privation. They don't give a fuck. They don't want, they don't give a fuck about logic. They care about things like money and the some number of followers they get. If their audience is sympathetic to them and if they can grift them into, it's about the Benjamins, man. and the audience doesn't necessarily want to hear this preachy stuff that basically deflates their reason to deny these women empathy. But yeah, every time that you've seen somebody wave away your problems and basically be like the fallacy, basically like first world problems. So that's a first world problem. That person was not using good logic. They were using a bad logical form. I mean, sorry, it's true. It's called the fallacy of relative privation, and it has many forms. But whenever we use the word a worse problem to dismiss the problem at hand, that is the fallacy of relative privation. If we dismiss a problem that is presented to us and use an even worse problem to dismiss it, then we are engaging in the fallacy of relative privation. Our problems don't become magically fake just because of the fact that there are worse problems that are going on elsewhere. So to personalize it and to make you understand why I come forward with this, the truth of the matter with me is, I mean, I feel like there's a huge empathy gap in our civilization. People are going out of their way to actually engage in any sort of nurturing behavior towards other people, and it's kind of pathetic if you really look at it because it's not. I mean, the thing that I find even more cringe-inducing about the case of Rebecca Watson and the elevator gate story is that the experience of coming up with an empathetic response to Rebecca Watson would have taken about that much time. That much, not very much at all, like, seriously. With me, it was just, "Okay, I hear you, I mean, thanks, I mean, I definitely have an interest in romantic pursuit of the opposite sex, so your pro tip, heard loud and clear, I don't elevator pitch a date, not seriously, make sure that women are able to find the exit if they wanna flee." You know? L like, it wasn't a big deal. And then, here we are having you 2 act like she said something that's super, super, super duper offensive, and it took 5 fucking seconds to come up with that kind of response. It's empathetic, and yet and then that was all that anybody here on YouTube had to do, and they couldn't do even that much. They had to go to dismiss, but there are even worse problems affecting women over there in the third world. So, screw you, Rebecca. Like, it's so obvious that like those women over there, they don't give a fuck about them. They don't give a fuck about women in the third world. They're just using them as a shield, to avoid having to do the work, you know? And yet, how much was Rebecca Watson even asking for? Jesus fucking Christ. So, I just I don't understand, when it comes to YouTube. I don't get it. I don't get the Dear Muslim letter, and so maybe I'm late to the party to say something about all of it. But yeah, you want to personalize it. That was kind of the reaction that I was having to all of it. It was just such a shit thing, and I lost a ton of respect for Richard Dawkins after that. I started to realize that he would come up here and he at one point, like, literally said something about, oh my god, he was talking about um eugenics, and he was saying, like, that he thought that it wasn't it might be possible, and I I have learned enough science, okay? I didn't learn science with a passionate curiosity for the world, though, that most other people who have come forward have come. My motivations to plunge the depths of science were entirely political and activist oriented. I have abused science in that kind of way. Unfortunately, I'm sorry to the scientist out there, but my core motivations for learning your trade craft have largely been blatantly political. And in articulating like this stuff, I do it to make a case for my own ideals and the things that I believe in, and that's the truth. I mean, I have not treated, the discovery process with the same kinds of curiosity and respect that you have. My motivations are a little bit less pure than yours, in that regard. I'm not there because I'm truly curious. I'm there because I want to own my opponents in some debates on the internet. So, what I would say about Richard Dawkins and his thing about eugenics is just that my concern with eugenics is just that it's a dumb idea. It's not that it's immoral, because moral arguments are so difficult to make in this day and age, in that there are so many people that will, hand wave away, especially because you're going to be asking questions about, in a godless universe, especially for an atheist, how are there answers to questions like of good and evil, and do good and evil even exist in your worldview? And it's like, how can you make a case for it if you don't think that there's a God, that they're going to ask, and there's no source that's, pushing this sort of thing? And it's like, okay, fine, I don't really know, okay, how I would go about doing that, but what I would say is just that I am concerned from an intellectual perspective, and one of the reasons why I'm concerned is the realm of microbiology. Now, there's a form of uh, martial arts that I'm also abusing for, the case of just making a metaphor here, known as jujitsu. And one of the things that you do in jujitsu is that you will analyze your opponent, and you'll see that they have something that is traditionally an advantage when it comes to hand-to-hand combat, but then you will take whatever that advantage is and try to hit it in such a way that flips it on its head and turns it into their weakness. You use the enemy's strengths to hurt them in jujitsu combat. Like, if your enemy is very tall and everything, you know that the bigger that something is, the harder it hits the ground when it falls, and you will probably like attack its legs, or something, and strategically to knock it and down on the ground where it doesn't expect. You hit where it doesn't expect to, and you turn its strength against it, and your opponent. And in that process, you end up, having a very strong form of martial arts as far as all that's concerned. Well, that metaphor, keep that in mind, because when I start talking about nature and microbiology, that same sort of thing happens when it comes to biology. So we have an immune system, but that immune system is fierce. And if you have a friend that has lupus, for instance, this, where the immune system basically starts to attack itself. Our immune systems can, start to push in the direction of self-destruction. They can turn against the body and malfunction in such a way that they start attacking the body's legitimate tissue, or rejecting a transplant. When somebody gets a transplanted organ, the immune system will see it as a foreign organ and a foreign body, and start to try to expel it from their systems. And so, a lot of the time when people get transplants, they also go on immunosuppressants to fight their own immune system's tendency to do this. And this has been, the history of things. And so keep that in mind as we go towards the explanatory depth that I'm now pushing towards. Microbiology is unfortunately incredibly difficult to predict. We have seen this because of what happened with COVID. We've seen the way that everybody predicted that was hip to virology, was predicting that a crisis was coming, but we weren't able to give, specifics to what was going to happen. Well, it seems that the the meat eating habits of the Chinese, that are so exotic and strange to us Americans, they were eating what we would characterize as bushmeat, and that, um, consumption of things was likely the ultimate source of COVID and where it came out of, and in a globalized world where things, where there's so many transports that, transport people and bodies of people from one side of the world to another, it didn't take long for COVID to basically be a worldwide phenomenon and, start to spread all over the globe. And, you know, when I talk about this, what I'm trying to tell you is that COVID, we got off easy. There was a much worse crisis way back in what has been falsely dubbed the Spanish flu, way back in the 1970s, in the 1900s, sorry, not the 1970s, but like 1914, 1913, like, in the earlier part of the 20th century. And one thing that was so interesting to me about, the Spanish flu and its outbreak in the history of the incident was that, you know, that outbreak and that virus killed. I'm 36 years old. So anybody from about the age of like 16-ish to like 40-ish was actually in the high risk category when it came to this virus. And unfortunately, when it comes to the Spanish flu, a lot of what you would know as like historical writing about what happened, and you know, uh, we have a ton of history books that have been written about like World War II, despite it being a terrible time for everybody that lived through it. They also felt that it was important to warn the world. Well, unfortunately, when it comes to the Spanish flu, it was like everybody was so intent on forgetting it. They didn't want to relive it. They didn't want to relive the trauma of what was happening, and so very little of it was ever committed to paper about what people's experiences were like going through it. And there was a bit of a conspiracy of silence where it's concerned, and so you have a situation, when the Spanish flu was horrifying. It was one in which, a bunch of people that under any other set of circumstances were exceptionally healthy and had very strong immune systems ended up dying. There's a word for what happened to their bodies within the scientific community known as the cytokine storm, and it's to explain to a layman what the cytokine storm is. It's when the body throws all of its immune. It's a, it like the immune system has a huge arsenal of things that it can use to fight an infection, and it just throws everything it has at things at once. Basically, this process can cause organ failure and damage. It's incredibly intense. And so, you know, when Richard Dawkins starts talking about how eugenics could work, I would caution, you know, there is no way for us to ultimately start experimenting with, trying to engineer a superior human without being certain that, we might fuck up by making a bad guess. I mean, if your guess is, a strong immune system, there are viruses like HIV that have evolved specifically to attack the immune system and kill off its ability to fight an infection. There are not in addition to that, in addition to HIV, there are other infections that because of what they cause the body to go into hyperdrive and overreact, the immune system to overreact to an infection, and you end up drowning in fluid in your lungs as a result of it, as of the cytokine storms, basically. So, COVID was mostly a threat to the elderly, and it was a bad problem for a few young people, but it was mostly still older people, older folk that were the most affected by it, and we've just gotten lucky that another infection of the nature of the original Spanish flu, which is still a misnomer that's mislabeled, but I still keep using it because I have to, like, discuss the intellectual territory that it's from. the intellectual territory that it came out of, or it came to knowledge of it. And yeah, we've been referring to it inaccurately for a long time. Okay, you're right. If you want to be a stickler for that sort of thing, but this particular infection was primarily a threat to people like you and I. If you're young, if you're a young guy watching this, my audience is more than likely like men of like 18 to 35-year olds usually. They're not my target demographic, but they're the ones that tend to watch my videos, for better or worse. So yeah, we would be the ones that were most affected by H1N1. I think it actually was. I think it was the original. I'd have to go verify that as far as my notes about the Spanish flu is concerned, and to check if I was right. But it was a long time ago, and the original infection was a very long time ago, and it swept the world. And a lot of the reason why it didn't get recorded, I guess, was that a lot of Americans that did survive that crisis had to bury their children, which is an experience that today, we talk about how no parent should have to bury their child. I don't disagree, it's true, but it's why we don't have a lot of writing about the Spanish flu and what happened. It was tragic.